All right, Greg, so we just started recording and I want to thank you for your time. I know from my perspective, you were one of the person really that opened the doors to political activism in every way, kind of like the only one. So happy to have you on this interview and just want to start out with how you got involved, how your life was and how you got to activism in Miami.
Well, I really sort of have to start before Miami, actually, because it's sort of an integral part of the story. I was working with the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. And I was living in Washington, D.C., and I was out. And for a number of reasons that it's not worth going into, there was a reason for me to come out to the chief counsel. I was the assistant counsel to the committee, subcommittee. And so I came out to him. He told the senator, who was my boss, Senator Nunn from Georgia. And then a couple of weeks later, I had an interview with the senator, and the senator said, Greg, your work here has been superb. I have really enjoyed working with you. Very, very pleased. But Marty, the chief counsel, has told me about your problem. And of course, I didn't know enough in those days to say, it's not my problem. But, he said basically that I was a security risk per se because I was gay. And I said, well, I'm out. I mean, I can't be blackmailed. And they said, he said, I understand that, but the security community insists that you're a security risk. And my job also includes, this was him speaking, includes my membership on the Armed Services Committee, which is my primary focus. And it's very cutthroat and competitive, and having information is the key. And if somebody finds out that I have anybody on any staff who is a security risk, they'll use that to withhold information. So basically, I have to ask you to go find another position, which was, my first brush with discrimination. And this isn't part of your interview about how I felt about it, but it was traumatic, to say the least. I think the worst part of it was the sense of powerlessness, the victimization where you couldn't even fight back. But anyway, I left the job and I got a job down here in Miami, and that's a long process, but I was an assistant U.S. attorney. And they do a background check on you, and they did a background check on me, and everything was fine until they went to the staff of the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations, and somebody said, yeah, he's not a bad guy for a fag. And everybody went nuts, and I went through the security risk thing all over again. Only this time, I fought it for two reasons. One, because I could. Against the Justice Department, I could do that. Against Congress, there was absolutely no recourse. And secondly, because I was in a corner, I had nowhere to go. I was down here for 2 months. I knew nobody. I had no contacts, no hope of finding another job. So I fought it, and that's a long story in itself. I got put under oath. I was read my rights. It was just a wild ride. But the bottom line of this whole thing is that by the time I got settled in Miami, this all was the first 6 months of being in Miami. By the time I got settled, they had taken, I mean the straight world, had taken its best shot at me, and I was still standing. And I looked around at the community in Miami and started focusing on it and realized that there were no social organizations. There was nothing in the community that I could find anyway. I wasn't Latin, so I wasn't able to join Latin organizations. I wasn't Black, so I couldn't join Black organizations, if any existed. And the reason for that, I finally came to the conclusion, was that the gay community here, and I use the term gay in the broadest sense, it's easier than saying GLBTQ, etc. So if I offend anybody, I'm sorry, but I'm old and that's the way it is. But the gay community was literally on its back. I mean, everybody that I met lived in absolute fear of being outed and being fired.
What year was this, Greg?
This was about 83. So we're talking, what, about 5 years after Anita Bryant. That's the amount of damage that that woman and that group did to a whole, tens of thousands of innocent people. I don't want to get started on it, but I mean, the community was just devastated. There was nothing. The only places to go to meet anybody was the bars or the baths. That was it. And if you managed to find a few friends and make friends with other gay people, good luck. That was fine. But there were no organizations. So, that at some point, and this was probably about 6 to 9 months after I got here, which would have been, as I recall, 83, somebody put together a group of people, probably about 20 of us, got together at someone's home and decided to form a men's only, gay only, or gay men's only, see the way to put it, a gay men's only organization, social organization, and networking, so that, you could refer business back and forth and things of that nature. But actually it was more social than business oriented. And that was basically, to my mind, the very first organization that started amid what I consider the ruins of the gay and lesbian community here in Miami after Anita Bryant. And I got more and more involved in network. I got involved in the membership committee. I got involved in the fundraising. There was a guy who came to us, Ron Barr, God rest him. He died of AIDS probably 15, 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, actually. But anyway, he was involved with an AIDS organization called Health Crisis Network, which was really brand new. It had been formed by, I think, 2 or 3 nurses at Mercy Hospital, I'm not sure. Anyway, it was in like its second layer of leadership, and he wanted a fundraiser, and he invited the whole membership committee over to his house for dinner, and then said, none of you is leaving until you give me a check for $100 each for Health Crisis Network. That was my introduction to gay fundraising. But it worked. I mean, everybody gave him a check for $100 each. But I got involved with HCN, and from HCN I got involved in other AIDS organizations. Body Positive Resource Center is the one I remember best. Hope, which was run by the Episcopal Church. There were several others. Project Yes, by the way, this was on the list that you sent me. Yes is not an HIV organization. It has nothing to do really with HIV. It's youth empowerment and support to, wait a minute. Sorry. It's a good thing I was wearing pants. So anyway, I got involved with those organizations. That led to my getting involved politically to try and get money from the county and the city for those organizations, which sort of got me into the politics. And by the way, I was asked to talk to the media, I think because I was a lawyer and I had really good credentials, but also because I could talk in public, by some of these organizations. So I started winding up being like a gay spokesperson. And I mean, basically that's how I wound up coming out in Miami. That's the process.
Can you say a little bit about the AIDS crisis, what that was like in Miami?
I don't even know where to begin with that, Damien. It was, I mean, it was so bad. I mean, we were all experts at how to put together a memorial service. I mean, that's how bad it was. You know, everybody you knew was dying. Everybody was scared to death of it. Nobody would pay attention to it. No politician, no political leader, health people. Well, health people was a little bit better, but not greatly so. You know, it was just, it was a nightmare. I suppose it was probably sort of like living through the Spanish flu or the bubonic plague. I mean, I don't know what it was like in those pandemics, but this was a pandemic. And the worst part was we were alone. There was nobody helping us. We had a president who wouldn't even say the word AIDS, let alone HIV. And that made a big difference. But I mean, the funny thing is AIDS was like a double-edged sword. It cut through the community murderously. And actually it impacted American culture by virtually almost killing off much of its originality and initiative, but that's another story. It cut through the community, but at the same time, it repaired the community. And by that, I mean, I forgot how to put this. All right, I always thought, I don't know if I ever said this to you, but I used to say it, not frequently, but enough, that if every gay person in the world suddenly turned blue for 48 hours, discrimination would end in its tracks. Because people would then God damn it. Sorry, Damien. I should have shut this stupid thing off. I apologize. If everybody turned blue, discrimination would end simply because people would realize their brothers, their sisters, their uncles, cousins, their sons, their fathers were gay. And they would realize two things. Number one, I don't want people discriminated against my brother. And number two, my brother doesn't act like they say queers act like. My brother's no faggot. And all of a sudden people would understand that we are real people. You know, we work hard, we pay taxes, you know, we fall in love and out of love, we have good days and bad days just like everybody else. And that's what AIDS did for us. It wasn't a 48-hour situation of turning blue, unfortunately. It was more like 48 years, or it seemed like it. But what it did was it forced the community to stand up for itself and for people to take the role of spokesperson and leader of an organization or asking for money or doing fundraisers. And the more people who did this, plus the more people who became ill and were known, you know, I mean, if you had HIV, you were obviously gay, period. That was the end of it. And so it forced people out by, number one, getting them sick, and number two, by getting other community members to stand up. Now, not everybody who stood up in order to help people with HIV and with AIDS were gay, right? There were a lot of straight people involved. But what that meant was that, number one, straight people were saying to other straight people, I don't care if somebody is gay, it's absolutely irrelevant to me, which essentially gives them permission to say the same thing. And that's a major start for the breakdown of discrimination. I've always remember friends who would not. I'm losing the train of thought. But that's enough. I don't want to kill your interview with 45-minute answers. I apologize. But I see AIDS as
no, it's great.
Sort of the way of us all turning blue and coming out. And coming out was the cure for our problems and the start of, you know, not just tolerance, but actual acceptance, up to and including the right to marry. So.
And you had been married, right, at one point?
Yeah, I was married for, oh God, 11 years when we were together. We were probably married 15 or 16. But we separated, and I had 2 sons. And of course, they stayed with my ex-wife. And we ultimately got divorced. I mean, it didn't make any difference to me because I couldn't marry. So, you know, and obviously I wasn't going to marry a woman. But she met some guy that she wanted to marry, so we ultimately got divorced. But yeah, that's.
And then another chapter, right? It's like another chapter of your life.
Yeah,
Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes that's hard for people to understand, like how gay people were married and then they weren't. Like,
well, I got to tell you, it wasn't easy. I mean, I think in retrospect that the internal tensions and the double life that I had to live, and I was out to my wife, by the way, but it was so bad that I realized at one point, if I did not get out of this, I would be the guy in the newspaper headline that says, "Man kills wife, 2 kids, then self." Because the frustration and the rage at the frustration and the double life were so debilitating and so overwhelming that it's almost indescribable. I mean, God, when I came out, Jesus, it was like a new world. I can't even describe it, but yeah.
And then in Miami, once you were getting toward the end, or not the end, but kind of the middle of the HIV/AIDS crisis, came the political activism, right?
Yeah, the one led to the other, but they were on parallel tracks. I didn't start political organizations for the purpose of getting funding for AIDS, but we first got involved politically, and I learned a lot of good lessons from this. When the state started talking about, or there were at least rumors about, mandatory testing and taking the names of everybody who was HIV positive. And, you know, we were envisioning, you know, concentration camps and things like that. Of course, they would have been the most well-designed internally concentration camps in the world, but concentration camps to concentration camp. We formed a group called DARE. And I know there is a group called DARE now. I don't remember what it stands for. Ours was Dade Advocates for Rights and Equality. And they are some anti-drug organization, the other DARE. But at this point, I think we were before the other DARE. And we used to lobby in Tallahassee. And there was a bill in Tallahassee to, I think it was mandatory reporting of anybody who was HIV and maintaining of list and et cetera, et cetera. And we were very, very much against it because we thought the implications of it were almost literally fatal to us as a community. And so we went up there as representatives of DARE. And what I realized in the course of this lobbying was that none of the politicians had a clue what DARE was. They only knew what it was because we said what it was. So as far as they knew, we had 10,000 followers, 10,000 voters. We could actually swing elections. And they simply assumed, because we were an organized political group, that we had community support. And so when we went into the committee room and we said, look, if you pass this bill, we are going to tell everybody in the community to not get tested, because if you get tested, you're going to be reported to the state if you're positive. So don't get tested. And the last thing in the world the medical community wanted at that point in time was anybody saying don't get tested. And so we beat this bill down, I think, 3 legislative sessions in a row, just by doing that. And the irony of it was that there were probably about 10 members of DARE. But it made me realize that politics in many, many ways is smoke and mirrors. And if you actually come across with any reality in terms of being able to deliver votes or raise money or provide practical, actual campaign support, that you, how to put this, it's not that you would be powerful, it's that you would have the opportunity to be heard. You would have access, that's it. You would have access to the politicians on both sides, even the ones you opposed, depending upon how you opposed them. If you did it in a gentlemanly fashion, God, that's an old-fashioned term, but if you get the point. If you did it in a reasonable, decent, polite way, you would not offend the people you were opposing. They'd actually want you on their side. And that's actually how it works in many ways. Not always, of course, in every situation. But realizing that, we started trying to expand. And we must have gone through about, I don't know, probably maybe 4 efforts to create a political organization that would catch, that would actually get the gay community support. And we finally succeeded with Dade Action PAC. And that's, you know, that's another story in itself. But that's where, this was all going on parallel. When I was in Dade Action PAC, I was also involved in on the boards of Health Crisis Network and Body Positive and Hope. I don't think I was on the board of Yes. I don't think Yes existed until the early 90s. But all of this was happening more or less at the same time. But when it came to Dade Action PAC, the timing was perfect for us because Miami Beach had just undergone a series of amazing scandals. Alex Dowd was the mayor. And as I recall, he was actually convicted for, I don't know if it was bribery or embezzlement or what, but he was forced out of office. Most of the city commission was forced out of office. And they basically rewrote the charter and started again. This is about 1990, 1991. And for the first time in anybody's memory, Miami Beach was electing 4 commissioners, I think it was, maybe it was 5, and the mayor. And we worked out a plan. I proposed this to Clark Reynolds and Dennis Leyva, and to the Dade Action PAC board, and basically said to them, look, if we can put our act together and raise some money for these guys, and get some people to go out and, you know, hand out leaflets or put them on the car, windshield wipers, stuff like that, you know, we can get them to support a human rights ordinance on Miami Beach. And everybody said, no, 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 that'll be another Anita Bryant. Don't do it, don't do it. And I said, no, we can do this. We can do this. We don't have to be confrontational. We don't have to dare people. We don't have to be in your face. We can go ahead and do this. We can make it work. It's just a matter of how you do it. And at this point, I was becoming more and more of a spokesperson, I think, maybe with the AIDS stuff. But it was getting to the point where the only spokespersons for the gay community were the guys left over from Anita Bryant. And one was Bob Kunst and the other was Jack Campbell. Those are the 2 I remember anyway. And They did an enormous amount of work and a lot of good work in the Anita Bryant campaign. It's just the deck was stacked against them. But to the media and the general public, they were questionable. Bob Kunst was very, very in your face, very aggressive, overly so, and off-putting because of that. And Jack Campbell was the owner or one of the owners of some of the bathhouses. And so, you know, straight people felt very uncomfortable around him. And he came across to them as unsavory. I never thought he was, but that's how he came across. And the media was looking for somebody with straight credentials, I guess, who was, you know, articulate enough to answer questions and give them a couple of sound bites, and was not afraid to say, yes, I'm gay, and not afraid to talk about gay and lesbian issues. And I wound up in that position really more by default than anything else, because they wanted to talk to me as opposed to Bob Kunst and Jack Campbell. And this helped, because when I was chairing Dade Action PAC, I was also this spokesperson, and they started identifying me. At first, they would only identify me as a gay activist lawyer from Holland and Knight, which really just thrilled the firm. But they stuck with me, God love them. But they ultimately started talking about Greg Baldwin, chair of the gay political committee, Dade Action PAC. And I started getting a name that way. So when we went to the and we decided we would endorse somebody in every single race on the beach. And we did. And we interviewed Cy Gelber, David Singer, Jimmy Margolis, David Kaplan, Bruce Kaplan. There was a woman, I can't remember her name. She was excellent.
Nancy Liebman?
No, before Nancy. Susan Gottlieb. Yeah, really liked her. She was fun. But anyway, we endorsed the mayor and a person for each commission. I can't remember if it was 4 or 5, like I said, but we endorsed everybody, and we only lost one race. But what we did during the campaign is we actually raised money for these guys. Now, it helped that there was a cap on the amount of money you could give, because we did not have a big pot of money. But we had enough money to be able to give to them as a PAC. And at one thing we did, and I don't know, maybe this is political trickery, but we had a PAC meeting on the beach somewhere on Alton. But I don't really recall the details of it. But I remember having the meeting, and we had Cy Gelber there. I think it was Jimmy Margolis and a couple of the others, because we were presenting them with the Dade Action PAC check for, I think the maximum was $1,000 or something. Maybe it was 500, but it was the maximum amount a PAC was allowed to give. And so we had them there, and the place was packed with people because we had gotten a lot of volunteers to work in the election. And these guys knew that our volunteers were out in the street, actually handing out their literature and, working for them, which is worth its weight in gold in local politics. And I went to, I think, 2 people in the crowd that I knew well and I knew could afford it. And I said, look, I'm going to ask, when I present this check, I'm going to ask people to voluntarily give another $100 to each of these candidates. Would you please raise your hand and say, I'll do it, I'll give 100. Because if I ask for volunteers to give money and nobody answers, we look like idiots. But if I ask for extra money and somebody says, yes, I'll give it, all right, we're going to look phenomenal. And that's exactly what happened. And it caught on, was the best part. because when 𝗓 came up and I gave 𝗓 his check and I said, guys, look, I don't want 𝗓 to have to leave with just $1,000 or $500 or whatever it was. It's an expensive game. There's a lot of expenses. Will anybody here just contribute another $100 to him? And I had my shill in the audience, his hand, said, I will, and on the spot, and gave it to 𝗟𝗪. And 2 other people did it. And every politician we brought in, I went through the same thing. For every politician, I had 1 shill in the audience. I shouldn't say shill. 1 person who was ready to do it in the audience. And there were always a couple of others who would do the same thing. So when we left that meeting, you know, these guys are thinking, this is an organization. The gay community vote is as important in this city as the Jewish vote and the Catholic vote. And, you know, I don't know how right they were, but the point was that they needed to believe it, and they did. And then after the election, I called up 𝗟𝗪 to congratulate him. 𝗟𝗪 was such an approachable man. He's one of the best political leaders I ever met in my entire life. I absolutely love that guy. But I'm digressing. I called him up to congratulate him, and we talked for a while. And basically, he said to me, not in so many words, but he said, what do you want? You know, how can I repay your assistance in winning this election? And I said to him, well, Mayor, actually, what I really would like you to do is I would like you to introduce me to my enemies. And he said, what? And I said, no. I said, look, you know, if I want to do this human rights ordinance, you've already agreed, you know, that you'll support it. But I don't want to trigger a giant controversy. I don't want to have, you know, a referendum or any of this nasty crap that the county went through with Anita Bryant. I want to talk to the people who oppose this. Now I can call, and I think Rabbi, I forget his first name, the last name was 𝗓𝗏𝗪, was basically sort of the acknowledged head of the Orthodox Jewish community. I think that's what it was. I could be wrong, but he was a very important player. I said to him, look, I can call Rabbi 𝗓𝗏𝗪 from now until I'm blue in the face. He's never going to take my call, right? But if you call him and say, Rabbi, you're going to get a call from Greg Baldwin, I would take it as a personal favor if you would take the call and talk with him. Then I can get through. He said, well, do you want me to, you know, talk about the ordinance? I said, no, I don't want you to talk about the ordinance. I said, the ordinance is our fight, not yours. That's something we want. You have no obligation on this. If I can't persuade my enemies, if I can't persuade enough friends to do this, then, you know, it's my problem and my community's problem, but it's not yours. So he said, okay. And he sent he arranged for a meeting, and he sent his assistant. This is good. Rabbi 𝗓𝗏𝗪 was a real gentleman, very fine man, or was. I don't know if he's still alive, but he was an impressive person. And we come into the office and we sit down, and Rabbi 𝗓𝗏𝗪 starts off by talking about how all gays are abominations. And that was the word he used, we're abominations. And I could see Gelber's guy starting to tense up because, you know, he was thinking, oh my God, it's going to be Bob Kunst. They're going to be over the desk at one another. You know, it's going to be a disaster. How did I ever let the mayor get into this? You know, and he goes on for like 5 minutes about, you know, all the reasons why the Jewish religion condemns homosexuality. And I said to him, thank you, Rabbi, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your candor. And I want you to understand, you know, we do draw a distinction between bigotry and true religious belief. And I understand that you're speaking, from the point of view of your true religious beliefs. And I respect that. And I'm not asking you to do anything that would violate those beliefs. And he said, well, what are you asking me to do then? And I said, I want to present to the commission a human rights ordinance that prohibits discrimination on all bases: religion, ethnicity, color, race, and sexual orientation. And he said, I can never support that. And I said, I understand that you can't do that, because I think your religious beliefs would, as a matter of principle, prevent you from doing that. But all I want is for you to not oppose it. Don't become a leader of the opposition. Let us try it. If we can get a majority on the commission, then great. We win, we pass it. He said, well, I can't accept it because it would force yeshivas to hire gay teachers. And I remember thinking to myself, what gay in his right mind would want to teach in a yeshiva? But fortunately, I had the common sense not to say that. And I said, I understand that. I said, how would you feel if there were an exemption for religious organizations? Now, I know this is a big thing today, but it wasn't then. And if I could get this guy to not oppose the ordinance, that would in effect be the same thing as getting his support. And since we had absolutely zero at that time, walking away with a half a loaf of bread was pretty good. So I said to him, how would you feel if there were an exemption for religious schools and organizations? And he said, well, then that would remove my objection. He gave me some story about how during the human rights ordinance in the county, the pre-Anita Bryant back and forth with Ruth Shack, that's who it was. He said to her, he said to me, I said to Ruth, Ruth, we cannot live with this. We will have to hire gays. And she said to me, well, Rabbi, that's the way it is. That's the way we passed the bill, and it's not going to change. He said, and so I had no choice but to oppose it. But if you create this exemption, then yes, I will agree not to oppose your human rights ordinance. And that's what we did. And I did that with Art Teitelbaum. Do you remember him?
Yep.
Yeah, the Anti-Discrimination League. God, what an excellent
Anti-Defamation League, no?
Anti-Defamation League. Yeah, what a class man he was.
Yep.
Superb guy. God, I miss him. I cried when he passed away. And I did it with the Catholic Church. I went to Brian Walsh for the Archdiocese, and to I forget his name now. It's an Irish name, who was the pastor at St. Patrick's over near Arthur Godfrey, where the causeway comes across. Mm-hmm. It's just a little, a few blocks off to the right. St. Patrick's, yeah. And I did the same with him, and basically worked through most of the communities, just simply asking them, just don't oppose us. That's all. Just don't mount a campaign. And they all agreed, and finally, we got the thing written up. The one fly in the ointment was, would we be allowed to create a right to sue somebody in this ordinance? And technically, a city does not have the constitutional authority under the Florida Constitution to create what's called a cause of action, or to give a person a right to sue. That's established by state or county law, I forget which. And we had a provision in there which would have allowed anybody who was aggrieved to sue. But the city attorney caught that in time, and it was something I couldn't argue because I knew he was right. So that provision had to go, and that was the way it was passed, and we got it through with a unanimous vote. And I knew, I mean, you know, now I'm sitting, I'm nervous as a cat because I'm afraid there's going to be a referendum. And Rick Katz, I don't know if you remember Rick.
Of course.
Yeah, but Rick was very big in political campaigns, and I forget the name of the profession, but he said you cannot possibly pass this without a bloody referendum, without penetrating at least 51% of every household in the city of Miami Beach. And I said, well, how long will that take? And he said, probably 5 years or something like that. And I thought, well, I ain't waiting 5 years. I'm sorry. You know, an election like this comes around once in a lifetime. So we went ahead and did it, but I was nervous. I was worried that there was going to be, you know, really sharp fallout. There was virtually no opposition in the commission. I mean, you know, we didn't have a crowd of people coming in screaming or you know, waving Bibles or anything like that, which was, you know, gave me hope. But I wasn't sure until about maybe 4, 5, 6 months later, when I went to some sort of an event, might have been a fundraising event, somewhere on the beach, and the guy who was running what was the name of the group, the opposition group? You remember this, the something family.
American Family Association?
Yeah, I think that's it.
AFA?
AFA. He, or his equivalent for the beach anyway, was at this reception. And I looked across the room and he looked across at me. We nodded to one another. And I thought, you know, this is stupid. I mean, if I hide over here, he's going to think I'm afraid of him. It's the last thing in the world I want. So I walked across the room and, you know, greeted him. We shook hands. We talked for a few minutes. I mean, he's a very nice guy and he was very cordial. It's not like today where, you know, everything's so ideological that, you know, you'd rather kill your enemy than or your opponent than shake his hand. And we chatted for a few minutes and he says to me, you know, Greg, everybody just absolutely hates that ordinance of yours. I don't know why he said of yours, but, you know, it wasn't mine. But he said, everybody hates it and they're up in arms about it. And I said, well, wish I could remember his name. I said, well, you know, that's why this city has a, you know, method for referendum. And if you feel that strongly or people feel that strongly, then, you know, go ahead and you know, start a campaign to repeal it, put it on the referendum ballot. And my heart was in my throat saying this, but, you know, I couldn't think of anything else to say. And I mean, I've never been that quick on my feet. And so that's what I said to him. And he said, well, that's the problem. I said, what do you mean that's the problem? He says, well, you preempted all the leadership. And it hit me that by having gone to the Catholic Church and the Jewish community leaders in advance before this thing, and having made the compromise we made, all of them were honoring their pledge to not oppose the referendum. And so we never had a referendum because they were not there to lead it. So anyway, how did we get into this? That's how I got into politics, and that was that's the story of the ordinance. And the whole point of it, it was really very simple. The whole point of it was not that this would, you know, stop discrimination or end discrimination or cause gay people to be tolerated or accepted. I hate the concept of toleration, by the way. I've always been after acceptance. I don't care about toleration. It's toleration you can withdraw. But I always thought that the point of it was to prove to the community, yes, we can do this. We can be political. We can be political successfully. People can come out on TV as gay and not be fired and not be ashamed. And this will work if we try. The whole idea was basically to politicize the community by showing them a success. That was it. Now, whether the ordinance was ever used to resolve any issues, and I think it was on a number of occasions, I don't know how successfully, was really beside the point. And that's why I didn't really care. I was disappointed that we couldn't give the right to sue, but I really didn't care because none of that was the point. The point of it was to persuade an inert, defeated, and crushed community that it could stand up on its own 2 feet and get what it wanted without screaming, without shooting, without yelling, without threatening, but just by becoming part of the political process. That was the point of the thing. So, and then you guys all took it from there. My plan was to go to Coral Gables next, and then possibly one other city, and then do the county. But that all got superseded by events. So, and ultimately it just went to the county, to you and George Versulli and God, Fran Bonsack was your co-chair, as I remember, for a while.
Correct, yeah.
So, yeah.
Greg, I just want to add, for context, how important Dade Action PAC and specifically that ordinance was. You know, you hinted at the horrible environment, how the gay community was in ruins after Anita Bryant. Absolutely correct. You know, I feel like there was a layer of thick ice, maybe about a foot.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like over everybody's head.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good metaphor or analogy. It's good.
Without that ordinance, the community wouldn't, so many leaders that stepped up wouldn't have, because it did exactly what you wanted. It really, it motivated people. It got them to see a light, and that light served to motivate and activize, you know, I would say hundreds, ultimately.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, the trick with straight people is for them to give permission to each other to say, it's okay to be gay, or I don't care if he's gay. And when you get one person to do that, it goes like a snowball. But it's like racism, all right? Both sides are so scared of the other that nobody wants to take that first step, right? But once they will give themselves permission to say, I don't care if he's gay. And once we give ourselves permission to say, I am gay and I'm not afraid or ashamed of being gay, right? Then the two come together, right? And it starts to work. It's not an overnight process, it's a process, and every process takes time. You know, but that's what it is, and that's how it works. You know, so you know, the funny thing is, most of all of this stuff was mostly by accident. And I didn't set out to be a politician. I didn't like politics. Fortunately, the politicians I had to deal with were the guys on Miami Beach, and a cleaner, more respectable group of leaders I don't think I've ever come across in any one city in my life. They were absolutely outstanding people, and clean as a hound's tooth. I think there was virtually zero corruption back then. I don't know what it is now. But I also remember dealing with the county and the county politicians and other politicians as well, and just wanting to come home and take a shower. Because it was so scummy, so phony, so, you know, I don't know, pay to play isn't quite the right word, but it's close to it. You know, it's, you know, what's in it for me? You know, that I absolutely hated every second of it. I didn't mind being the spokesperson on TV and stuff because I knew I was good at it. I lost my edge after a while. But I was good at it for a while. And I wasn't afraid to do it. And I knew I wasn't going to be fired because everybody in my firm knew I was gay. So I was safe and busy trying to make it safe for others. So Yeah, but it just, it just all happened. I didn't set out, I didn't move to Miami and decide to come out and pass a human rights ordinance or something like that. It was just, the course of events that led it in this direction. So.
And what about now, where you see, I'm curious, as you see the movement from when you were very, very, very active till today, where you're a bit less active and maybe a little more introspective of us as a community?
Well, we can afford, I think, to be a little less active because we have secured a lot of the rights that we were thinking of or actually dreaming of. I never believed I would live to see the day where marriage equality would happen. I mean, that was something that I thought the next generation would get. And I used to say that, we will know that we as activists, and I hate that term, but
So do I.
lack of a better one, but we and what we are doing here, when gay kids look at us and say, "You did what? Why?" Then we'll know that we have succeeded. And we're almost at that point now. So in a sense, a decrease in activism is not fatal, and it's not especially the wrong message. It's a natural, to my mind, a natural progression for any community. That when you've basically accomplished much of what you want to accomplish, it is not as urgent anymore. That said, there's a statue in front of the archives in Washington, some Roman in a toga holding fasces, I think. And the statue is just another statue, but the inscription under it has always stuck with me from the day I saw it. And the inscription under it is, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." And the price of our liberty as LGBTQ people is eternal vigilance, because there is always going to be someone there who wants to take away our rights. Just like there's always going to be the 10% that want to take away the right for freedom of religion, or they want to take away the right to be against religion, or everybody wants to take somebody's rights. There's always that 10%. It's when it gets to be larger than 10% that it gets dangerous. And that's when you have to reactivate the activism. So eternal vigilance is our burden. It's something that comes with the territory of being gay. But then again, when you think of it, it's the same burden for Latins and for Blacks and for Jews and for Christians and for white people and everybody else. Because there's always that 10% that wants to take away somebody's rights. So anyway, to get back to what you're saying, the decrease in activism doesn't bother me that much, because I think we have the mechanisms in place now, which we didn't have 40 years ago, Damien, right? We have national organizations now and local organizations that are very effective and very successful. SAVE Dade, has met the test of time, which is crucial. In other words, SAVE Dade didn't exist just to do the human rights ordinance. It exists to speak for gay people publicly and to speak to politicians and other leaders and business leaders publicly on behalf of the community. And it has accepted that role, and its role has been accepted. It's there, it's not going anywhere. And there's always going to be people that will support it financially. The national organizations are the same, right? Now, 40 years ago, I wouldn't have said anything like this. I would have said 40 years ago, the national organizations are a major pain in the ass, because what they dangle in front of the wealthy gay members of the community, fancy titles and associations and big gala parties in Washington and all of this trash, in return for money. And that money should be going to the local organizations, not the national. The national organizations are meaningless without the underpinning of a community. You know, Tip O'Neill was not joking when he said all politics is local. All politics is local. And you can have the most magnificent and well-financed national organization, but if there isn't something underneath it to provide not just money, but actual votes, then the national organization is totally useless. So I used to war with the national organizations all the time because they would come to Miami and they'd want money. And they would take money that should have gone to SAVE or to Dade Action PAC or to something else or to an AIDS organization. But once we got the ordinance on the county level, once we had gotten to that point, then my thinking changed. And now I think that we have an obligation to support not only the local, but the national organizations as well. And the national organizations are much more effective now because local organizations are in place to support them, to help them raise money, but also to, you know, to vote. So how did we get into this?
Just talking about the movement, kind of like your thoughts
yeah.
where we
Yeah,
are.
there was one other thing I wanted to add about the movement itself. And there was one thing that worries me. And it's been worrying me ever since I began with this. And that's that we have no history. I mean, we have a history, but we don't know it. And let me see, before you started recording this, we were talking about this, but I'll say it again and try your patience. You can always edit it out. But each individual is nothing more than that individual's own personal history. And by personal history, I don't mean what happened to me since I was born in 1946. I mean, I am brought up in a society, so I am that society. I am the product of slaveholding. I am the product of the Industrial Revolution. I am the product of prohibition and anti-prohibition and World War II and the Civil Rights era and the lynching era. That's all me. And the reason it's me is because the society that taught me and brought me up and taught me all of the lessons, the ones that I didn't even know I was learning and the ones that I knew I was learning in school, right? All of that stuff is taught by that society, which is nothing but a conglomeration of all those competing different values. Right? So if I don't know my own history, and again, I don't mean mine personally, I mean the history of my country, for example. If I don't know what created the society that brought me up, then I don't know who I am. I am just an entity somewhere, floating freely somewhere with no aim and no purpose because it has no roots. And to tell you the truth, that kind of approach to life is unbelievably damaging. That's actually why homophobia exists and racism exists, is because there's so many people who don't know the history and they are not able to look at the other parts of society and understand where they're coming from. Whereas now, you know, I mean, I've done studies about lynchings and stuff like that, how on really good, very favorable statistics, we only managed to lynch one Black person a week for a century. To think about that. One person a week for a century. In some places in the South, it was, you know, it was even more common and frequent than that. But that's another story. I can't even begin to cope or understand racism until I understand that Black people are the product of that history. And they're seeing me through that lens. All right, so I can't talk to them unless I understand where they're coming from, and I cannot talk to them unless I understand where I'm coming from, and then neither of us can do that without knowing our history. So the history of the community is the key thing. To know who did what not for the honor and glory of whoever did what, but to know what went into it and what it was then and what it could become again in the worst possible case scenario, and why people fought and how they fought, I think is really something crucial to know. Now, you know, we leave out all of the ugly, dirty parts, you know, the minor betrayals, the double crosses, you know, the squabbles, excuse me, the petty squabbles, and the big fights. But they're all part of it, and that comes with the process of learning your own history. As the more you dig into it, the more you get into that stuff. But that stuff is not the important thing. The important thing is to understand who we are individually as a community and how we got to being what we are and what we represent in the eyes of others. So the history, I'm not worried about a decrease in activism, but I am worried that we do not know and we do not preserve our own history. And I think that is far more troublesome to me than lack of activism or even lack of money.
Mhm. And that also speaks to diversity and inclusion, right? Because if you know your history, it's easier to move across communities.
Yeah, you would think, but you know, when it comes to racism and homophobia, for example, you know, there are people who will say things today, knowing that I'm gay and knowing that Jose and I are married, that will say the most ridiculously homophobic things because they don't understand, right? And so, you know, with all of this comes some effort on trying to understand. I mean, when it comes to racism, you know I'm a bigot. I don't like it. I try to not be a bigot, but I know deep down I am. That's how I was brought up. I was brought up in the 50s. That's not an excuse. It's maybe an explanation, but it's certainly not an excuse.
How do you feel that? How do you feel that? Why do you say that?
Well, because I still, I'll give you a recent example. It's not based on race. It's based on gender. I was watching a series of lectures on, of all things, I mean, there's so few people who have my taste. I was watching a series of lectures on the causes of World War I. And there's a professor, I can't think of where she's at. It's a very prestigious school, but Margaret Macmillan, she's written a number of outstanding books on the First World War and other subjects. And I was listening to her lecture and I was thinking, God, I got halfway through and I caught myself thinking, God, she's good for a woman. And then I realized what I had just said to myself. I was surprised that a woman could be as good as a man. Oh my God. And it was just a thought that popped into my head. Now, the only cure for it that I know, I'm never going to stop thinking that way. I think the only cure for it is to recognize it and correct it and move on. But that's what I mean. It's built in.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see the movie South Pacific?
No.
There's a song in there. It's a story. It's a musical, very, very popular. Great songs too. You know, Some Enchanted Evening comes from it. You know, but very popular. But it was an anti-racism musical, and probably 50 years ahead of its time. Came out in the early 50s, early 50s, I think. And there's a song in there that one of the white guys sings, where a French planter says to him, I don't understand why you people have such problem with people who aren't white. What is it with you people? And he sings this song that basically goes, you've got to be taught from your earliest days. You've got to be taught to hate all the people your relatives hate. It has to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. It wasn't a great hit song, but it's always stuck with me because it was so far ahead of its time. but also because it gets across the point that, we do teach ourselves these things. When I say I'm the product of slavery, I don't mean simply that, the economic position of my family ultimately probably is traceable back to slavery. Not necessarily that we own slave, but that, we, like almost the entire country, lived off of the profits of slavery. That's how our industrial revolution began. So when I say that, that we are our own history, it's what I'm trying to say is that we are taught things expressly and subliminally. I know how to put this. Wait a minute. I just thought of a probably decent metaphor. This works for me. Maybe it doesn't for you because you're a different generation. But when I first started having sexual feelings, puberty and those wonderful, crazy, terrible years, I knew I had these feelings, but I had no words for them. Absolutely none. I thought I was I thought I was the only person in the world who thought this way, felt this way. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. Nobody ever said to me, Greg, if you become queer, or if you are a homosexual, or if you are gay, that is wrong, that is bad. Nobody ever said that to me. I just knew it. I knew it because society trains people very subtly. I suppose you could, as an example, you could say, when I was growing up, every advertisement I ever saw for probably the first 15 to 20 years of my life was always white couples or white people in ads. I don't think I ever saw a single black person in any advertisement at all. And the same thing happened to us, right? We never saw any gay people. There were no gay role models. All right? That's how society teaches, in a sense. It basically says to you, the ideal is what I am showing you in all of the advertisements and in all of the Christmas cards and in all of the Valentine's cards. It's always a boy and a girl, and it's always white people, and they're always middle class. And this is what you are going to be. This is what your ideal should be. This is how we are teaching you, and this is what you become. Nobody ever said to me, black people are bad. I just knew that black people were really sort of different and a little bit scary, because society is scared of them. Anyway, I'm getting into deep waters here and far beyond what you want and what you're looking for.
No, listen, I think it's great. I wanted to kind of pick your brain as we close this out a little bit on what your advice would be for the younger folks coming up.
Wow, I'm not sure I'm qualified to give anybody advice, even myself. Let me see, what advice would I give?
If it was a family member, somebody younger in your...
Yeah. Let me see. I'll just do something next temp. To thine own self be true, and it shall follow as the night the day. Yeah. No, I guess if I were going to give anybody advice, it's know your history. Know what went before you. Because, as Maya Angelou said, and I mentioned this to you earlier, I think before we started, but Maya Angelou has an interesting quote. She says that history, with all its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. You cannot avoid living it again if you don't know what it is. So my advice to people, gay, straight, lesbian, Jewish, Latin, black, white, is know your history. And when I say you, I don't mean you personally, I mean you generally. Learn what Black people went through, learn what gay people went through in the 50s and 60s. I cannot even fathom living the way our community must have lived in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s. I can't compute it. I can't grasp it. The desperation and the horror of it must have been unbearable. But you have to understand things like this in order to understand who you are, what made you, why you are here, why you have the rights that you have today, why other people don't have those rights today. So if I were going to give advice to anybody, it would be, study history. Know what you came from and who you came from and where you came from.
That's great. No.
That's as good as I can do. Yeah, it's about as practical as take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning.
Yeah. No, Greg, you've been very generous with your time. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Any last words?
No, not really that I can think of. No, just that, while I hated doing it while I was doing it, it's sort of like Vietnam. I hated being in the Army. I hated Vietnam. I hated getting shot. But if I had it to do all over again, I would do it in a heartbeat. And I hated all of this political shit. And all the effort and work that went into it. I absolutely loathe fundraising. But if I had to do it over again, I would do it in a heartbeat. So I don't think I have any regrets for all of the pain inflicted on me and all the pain I inflicted on others and all the things that I would change, if I could now and do differently. No, I don't think I have any real regrets on it. It is what it is. The mistakes I made, made me who and what I am. And they made me realize that, God puts erasers on the end of pencils for a reason. We all need them. We all make mistakes and have to erase something sooner or later. So that's it.
Well, Greg, I can tell you, thank you from a very huge thank you from the community, from me, from many others who you influence. We stand on your shoulders on the work that you've done, without a doubt. And just what a pleasure, really. Thank you for the time that you've given, and so many really good things, chapters that we don't know, and great advice, especially the whole thing about history and knowing your history. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure, Damien. It was good seeing you again.
Good seeing you always. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.